I never imagined that a quiet Saturday morning on my property could turn into such a ridiculous confrontation, but that's exactly what happened. I had spent years building this little sanctuary of mine, a sprawling stretch of land with rolling hills, a small cabin tucked into the woods, and, most importantly, a pond that my kids and I had spent countless weekends stocking with fish and enjoying together. The pond wasn't just water and fish, it was our escape, our little slice of peace away from the constant noise of the outside world. That morning, the sun was just cresting over the horizon, spilling golden light across the calm water, and the air carried that crisp, fresh scent of early spring. My kids, Tommy and Ellie, were already out there, fishing lines cast with the kind of eager focus that only children who've been given free rein in nature could exhibit. I was sitting on the porch, a steaming cup of coffee in my hands, listening to the gentle lapping of the water and the occasional cheerful shout from them whenever a fish tugged at their line. Life felt simple, complete, and entirely mine. But that serenity didn't last. As the wind carried the sound of their laughter across the trees, I noticed movement at the edge of the property. A figure emerged, striding toward the pond with a kind of purposeful aggression that immediately set my instincts on high alert. It was Karen, Mrs. Karen from the HOA, the neighborhood tyrant whose idea of community, order, involved peering into everyone else's yards and enforcing rules she didn't fully understand. My stomach sank. I knew her type all too well, loud, entitled, and convinced that the world revolved around her interpretation of rules, even when they didn't apply. By the time she reached the water's edge, my kids had barely noticed her, too engrossed in reeling in their next catch. Karen wasted no time. She started yelling, her voice carrying over the pond, sharp and accusatory. "What do you think you're doing? Fishing here? You can't. This isn't allowed." Her tone was aggressive, almost triumphant, as if catching them in the act of a great crime was the highlight of her miserable existence. My blood ran cold, not because of her shouting, but because I realized this was about to escalate. I called out to my kids, telling them to stay put and not respond, my own voice carrying a mix of frustration and caution. Karen, oblivious to the fact that she was trespassing on my property, kept up her tirade, listing off a jumble of HOA rules, none of which applied to the private pond in my backyard. I felt a surge of irritation mixed with disbelief. How could someone be so willfully ignorant? I had taken the time to understand the nuances of our neighborhood regulations and property boundaries, and yet here she was, yelling at my innocent kids as if they were committing a felony, completely blind to the fact that she had no authority over my land. I stood, putting my coffee down, and walked toward her, trying to maintain calm while my heartbeat pounded in my ears. "Karen," I said firmly, "this is private property. My kids are allowed to fish here." Her head snapped toward me, surprise flickering across her face, quickly replaced by indignation. "Private or not, you can't just," she began, but I cut her off, raising my hand. "I think you need to step back. This is my land. My pond. And my kids have every right to enjoy it without being screamed at by the HOA president's favorite volunteer." Her mouth opened and closed, no words coming out, as if she had just realized her mistake but was too proud to admit it. My children looked up at me, a mix of confusion and worry in their eyes, and I walked over to them, kneeling down. "It's okay," I whispered. "She doesn't get to control this space. You're safe. This is your pond." As I spoke, I felt a mixture of relief and simmering anger. Relief that nothing worse had happened, anger at the absurdity of someone so disconnected from reality trying to police my family's private enjoyment. Karen finally backed off, muttering something about rules and community standards, her voice fading as I calmly escorted my kids back toward the cabin. The morning sun glinted off the water, now calm again, reflecting the blue sky as if nothing had happened. But inside, I knew this was just the beginning. Karen had shown her cards, and now I had to be prepared for the fallout, because in my experience, people like her never accept being wrong quietly. They escalate. They find allies. And they make every effort to turn a personal victory into a public spectacle. I looked at Tommy and Ellie, whose faces were now bright with a mix of relief and lingering anxiety, and I promised myself that I would protect this sanctuary, no matter what bureaucratic storms Karen or the HOA tried to stir up. The pond, my kids, and our weekends together were not negotiable. And if anyone, including the insufferable Karen, tried to challenge that, they would quickly learn that they were meddling with the wrong family. From that day on, every visit to the pond was underscored by a quiet vigilance. I installed clear boundary markers, made sure our property rights were documented and visible, and reminded my children that while they could enjoy their freedom here, they needed to remain aware of outside interference. Karen may have thought she could intimidate us, but she had underestimated the bond between a father and his children, and the sense of ownership and pride that comes from cultivating your own private corner of the world. Little did she know, that confrontation would set off a series of events that would redefine her perception of power, and force her to recognize, in no uncertain terms, that my family and I were untouchable in the space we had built together. The following week, the incident with Karen lingered like an unwelcome shadow over every moment I spent on my property. I had thought that simply asserting my rights and calmly escorting my children back to the cabin would be enough to restore the peace, but Karen's type never lets things drop. They simmer, they fester, and they come back with more fervor, armed with imagined authority and a network of equally opinionated neighbors who thrive on conflict. I spent Monday morning surveying the boundaries of my land, walking along the tree line, checking the pond's perimeter, and making mental notes of any areas where someone, particularly someone with a sense of entitlement like Karen, could encroach. The air smelled of damp earth and fresh-cut grass, and the birds sang as if oblivious to the impending chaos. My children were with me, trailing behind as they often did, their fishing rods slung over their shoulders like miniature spears of adventure, their laughter a soundtrack to the simple joys I hoped would remain uninterrupted. But peace, I knew, was fragile in a neighborhood dominated by overzealous HOA enforcers. I called my attorney in the afternoon, detailing the incident and asking for advice on posting clear signage about private property and the legal protections surrounding our pond. I wanted to make it impossible for anyone to claim ignorance or, worse, to challenge my authority over our own land. While the attorney spoke in measured tones, outlining my rights and the ways I could fortify my position, I felt a mixture of relief and simmering irritation. Relief because, in the eyes of the law, my ownership was unambiguous. Irritation because the confrontation had shaken something deeper in me, the notion that simply living on your own property and giving your children freedom could provoke such hostility. By the time the conversation ended, I had drafted a plan, visible boundary markers, a notice to the HOA formally asserting our rights, and a detailed log of the incident for any future disputes. I hung up the phone and took a deep breath, staring across the pond as my children waited at the shallow edge, their small hands scooping water to investigate the minnows darting beneath the surface. Tommy looked up at me, squinting against the sun, and asked if Karen would be back. I tried to soften the tension, smiling as I ruffled his hair. "She might try," I said cautiously, "but we know our rights. And nothing she does can take this away from us." That afternoon, I worked on reinforcing the shoreline with natural barriers and installing subtle but clear signage indicating private property, fishing by permission only. It wasn't meant to intimidate anyone who respected boundaries, but it sent a clear message to interlopers that the pond was not public, and my children's right to enjoy it was non-negotiable. As I hammered the last post into the earth, I reflected on Karen's behavior, trying to understand the psychology behind it. People like her thrived on exerting control over situations that were none of their concern. They were drawn to confrontation not out of necessity but from an insatiable desire to dominate, to assert power where it did not belong. And in a strange way, this knowledge strengthened my resolve. I realized that protecting our property was about more than legality, it was about defending our freedom, our family, and the small joys that gave our lives meaning. That evening, I sat on the porch with a notebook, jotting down ideas for a more permanent solution: fencing that wouldn't intrude visually but would delineate the property unmistakably, legal notices ready to deploy if anyone dared trespass, and a clear set of family rules to ensure my children understood the importance of respecting boundaries without fearing unnecessary interference. The sun dipped low behind the trees, casting long shadows across the water, and I felt a quiet satisfaction as the pond reflected the twilight sky. But my peace was punctuated by an uneasy awareness that Karen would not rest. She would likely report, complain, and perhaps even mobilize others to challenge our authority. I imagined her phone calls, her pointed emails to the HOA board, the self-righteous emails that began with, "I witnessed a violation of the community standards," but omitted any acknowledgement of her own trespass. The thought made me tense, but I also knew that preparation was my ally. Over the next few days, I continued fortifying our private sanctuary. I cleared the brush along the edges to ensure unobstructed sight lines, making it easy to spot anyone approaching. I checked the security cameras I had installed discreetly around the cabin, ensuring they captured every angle without disrupting the natural aesthetic of our property. My kids grew curious about the technology, asking questions about why I was filming the surroundings. I explained that it was not to spy on them or ruin their fun but to protect the space we loved from people who didn't understand boundaries. They seemed to accept the explanation, more interested in whether they could catch a fish big enough to win the small, homemade trophy I had promised for the day's biggest catch. By the end of the week, the pond felt like a fortress of serenity again, at least for a while. My children returned to their fishing with renewed enthusiasm, laughter ringing across the water like a bell of victory. But every now and then, I caught a glimpse of Karen's face in my mind, imagining her storming down the hill with her usual self-importance and unwarranted fury. I shook my head, unwilling to let anxiety spoil the joy of the moment. Instead, I focused on the tangible, the things I could control: the boundaries, the rules, the safety of my children, and the unwavering knowledge that this pond, this land, and the countless memories embedded within it were mine to protect. I spent a long Saturday afternoon sitting on the dock, sketching out plans to expand our little haven, adding a small wooden platform for easier fishing and perhaps a few benches to sit and watch the sunset. Each plank, each nail, each careful measurement was a testament to the hours of labor, love, and care invested in this land. And as I worked, I realized that Karen's shouting, her overreach, and her misguided sense of authority only underscored the importance of what I was doing. She had inadvertently reminded me why protecting personal space matters, why defending one's family against baseless interference is not just a matter of pride but of survival and well-being. The pond was no longer just a body of water, it was a symbol of resilience, a tangible proof that my family could carve out joy and safety amidst a world often eager to impose itself where it did not belong. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, I watched my children gather their catch and head toward the cabin, their smiles untouched by the previous chaos. I felt a deep, unshakable satisfaction knowing that we had reclaimed our peace, that our sanctuary remained ours, and that no amount of shouting from a self-important HOA member could diminish the bond between a father, his children, and the land they cherished together. The events of that week would linger in my mind, certainly, but they also fortified a lesson I had long known but rarely confronted with such immediacy: vigilance, preparation, and a steadfast belief in your own rights are the only true shields against intrusion. And in this case, the shield was my love for my family, the clarity of ownership, and the quiet but resolute determination to never let anyone, not even the most insufferable Karen, dictate how we lived our lives on our own land. By the middle of the following week, I had settled into a cautious routine, but the peace was deceptive, fragile as morning mist over the pond. Each day, I watched my children fish with careful attention, noting every ripple, every shadow along the tree line, as though expecting Karen or one of her cohorts to appear at any moment. The previous confrontation had taught me the subtle art of anticipation. Those who thrive on authority, on control, rarely give up easily. I felt the tension in my shoulders constantly, a low hum of vigilance beneath the surface of everyday life, but I refused to let it dominate my interactions with my kids. Tommy and Ellie were blissfully unaware of the strategic mental chess I was playing, more concerned with the weight of their rods, the chance of a bite, and the thrill of a tug on the line. That innocence was sacred, and I would do everything to protect it. That Tuesday, just as the sunlight struck the pond at an angle that made the water shimmer like molten glass, a rustle in the brush signaled the arrival of an uninvited observer. My heart tightened in anticipation, and I immediately scanned the perimeter, noting the distinct figure of Karen, clipboard in hand, striding down the slight incline toward the pond with the same infuriating sense of authority she always carried. She had escalated quickly, I realized, bringing her little arsenal of HOA bureaucracy with her, handwritten notes, printed citations, and a smug expression that spoke volumes of her conviction that she was morally, socially, and legally correct in confronting me and my children on our own land. As she approached, I walked toward her, my gait purposeful, and my voice calm but firm. "Karen," I began, keeping my tone neutral to avoid unnecessary provocation, "you're trespassing. My kids are fishing on private property. This stops now." Her eyebrows shot up, her lips forming the familiar tight line of someone who believed she was about to deliver a moral coup. "Private property or not, I have a duty to report violations," she said, glancing at her clipboard as though it were a sacred text. "You know the HOA rules. Fishing without a permit." I held up my hand to interrupt. "Permit? There is no permit required for fishing in my private pond. The HOA has no jurisdiction here, none at all." Her face contorted with disbelief, a mixture of outrage and indignation, as though my words were incomprehensible. "You can't just," she started, then paused mid-sentence, realizing that her argument was crumbling under the weight of legality. I took a deliberate step closer, enough to assert presence without threat, and my voice grew more measured, resonant. "Let me make this clear. My children are allowed to fish here. You are trespassing, and you need to leave, now." For a fleeting moment, her eyes flickered with hesitation. I could see the gears turning behind her facade of self-righteousness, but I also knew that hesitation was only temporary. People like her never concede easily. They retreat briefly, regroup, and return with renewed vigor. Meanwhile, Tommy and Ellie froze, rods still in hand, watching the interaction with wide eyes. I crouched slightly, giving them a reassuring nod, whispering, "Stay calm. We're okay. This is our land. Nothing she does changes that." Karen finally muttered something about community oversight and responsibility, words that sounded more hollow than threatening, and I gestured firmly for her to step back. She hesitated a moment longer, glaring as if I had personally insulted her life's mission, then backed toward the edge of the property, still muttering, clipboard waving in a half-hearted display of authority. Once she disappeared into the trees, I turned to my children, relief washing over me in a slow, simmering wave. "All right," I said gently, "let's get back to fishing." The moment they resumed their focus, I walked along the water's edge, inspecting the area for any signs of lingering intrusion or tampering. That's when I noticed subtle disturbances near the reeds along the far side, footprints in the soft mud, slight depressions in the grass, evidence that Karen, or perhaps one of her allies, had been closer than I realized. My jaw tightened, and I made a mental note to reinforce the boundaries further. That evening, I pored over the HOA covenants and property laws, ensuring that I had every detail documented. I drafted a formal letter to the HOA, not out of anger but out of necessity, outlining the incident, asserting my rights, and demanding that no further interference occur. I sent copies to my attorney, retaining meticulous records in case this escalated into legal action. The process was tedious but vital. I couldn't afford to be blindsided by bureaucracy or manipulation. Over the next few days, I worked to fortify the physical perimeter of the pond, constructing low, natural barriers that delineated our space without obstructing its beauty. Wooden posts, carefully spaced, marked the limits, and small signs reminded any potential intruders that this was private property, but they were discreet enough not to mar the landscape or intimidate anyone who genuinely respected boundaries. My children adapted quickly, fascinated by the construction process and eager to help, even if only in small ways, passing tools, holding measuring tape, or proudly hammering the occasional nail. Their involvement was more than assistance. It was a tangible way to instill a sense of stewardship, to teach them that ownership comes with both privilege and responsibility. Throughout all this, Karen's presence lingered in the back of my mind, an unseen yet potent force, reminding me that vigilance was as important as enjoyment. On Friday, she escalated further. I received an email from the HOA, carefully worded but unmistakably referencing the pond, my children, and alleged community disturbances. The message attempted to frame a harmless Saturday morning of fishing as a violation of neighborhood standards, cleverly omitting any acknowledgement of her trespass. I read the email aloud to my children, explaining the absurdity of the claims while reassuring them that we were fully within our rights. Their faces showed a mixture of confusion and concern, and I realized the importance of balancing truth with comfort. They needed to feel safe, not embroiled in adult disputes. I responded to the HOA, calmly but firmly asserting our property rights, attaching a map highlighting the private boundaries, and including photographs of the pond and surrounding land. I documented the footprints from earlier in the week and noted the intrusion as evidence. My message was professional, concise, and unyielding, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The next morning, I woke to a sense of cautious relief, but it didn't last. Karen had evidently interpreted my formal response as a challenge, a provocation to escalate her crusade against what she perceived as lawlessness on her watch. I found her parked across the street, binoculars in hand, attempting to monitor activity on our property. I stepped outside, making my presence known, and waved at her with a calm, measured smile that masked the storm of irritation building within. She scowled, waved her hand dismissively, then returned to her observation as if I were merely a background nuisance in her self-styled drama. That afternoon, I gathered my children by the pond and held an impromptu lesson on privacy, respect, and resilience. People will sometimes overstep, I explained, even when they have no right. It's up to us to stand firm, to protect what's ours, and to remain calm under pressure. Tommy and Ellie listened intently, nodding solemnly, though their young minds could only grasp part of the complex reality I was describing. Nevertheless, I knew that these lessons were vital, that instilling awareness and confidence in them was just as important as defending our land. As the sun set, painting the pond in shades of gold and crimson, I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Despite Karen's relentless attempts to intimidate, to assert control over what was undeniably mine, the pond remained a sanctuary. My children's laughter returned, undiminished, carrying over the water like a shield against intrusion. In that moment, I recognized a deeper truth: the battle with Karen was about far more than fishing or HOA rules. It was a test of resilience, a reaffirmation of boundaries, and a demonstration of the unbreakable bond between a father and his children. And as night fell, the pond reflecting the first stars in a deepening sky, I felt the certainty that no amount of bureaucracy, yelling, or entitlement could ever erode what we had built here together: the freedom, the joy, and the sanctity of our private land. The following week marked a new level of absurdity in Karen's relentless crusade against what she perceived as lawlessness on my property, and I could already feel the tension coiling tighter around our lives like a living thing. On Monday morning, I noticed unfamiliar tire tracks on the dirt road leading up to the pond, wide, heavy, and deliberate, the kind of track someone leaves when they plan to linger rather than pass through. My heart sank, but I forced myself to stay calm, taking note of every detail as if preparing for a trial that I hoped would never happen. When I arrived at the pond with Tommy and Ellie, I found more evidence of intrusion: small bits of litter, an empty soda can, a crumpled brochure from the HOA, and slight scuff marks on the grass near the dock where my children had been fishing the day before. It was clear that Karen had not only trespassed but had returned, and worse, she had left evidence that screamed her presence. I knelt down, inspecting the ground, careful not to disturb the prints more than necessary, and felt a mixture of frustration and resolve. This was no longer a casual annoyance, it was a pattern, a concerted effort to intimidate and exert power where none existed. I called my attorney again, detailing the intrusion, and asked for advice on escalation. We discussed the possibility of filing trespass reports, issuing cease and desist letters, and even involving local law enforcement if necessary. My attorney emphasized documentation, stressing that a thorough record would make it impossible for Karen or the HOA to misrepresent events. By mid-morning, I had decided to take proactive measures. I installed a small, discreet camera on the dock, facing the pond, and another at the edge of the tree line where Karen was likely to approach. I wanted irrefutable evidence of any further trespass, not only to protect myself legally but also to safeguard my children from unnecessary confrontation. Tommy and Ellie watched intently, curious about the cameras, and I explained that they were there to protect our space, just like the boundary signs we had installed the week before. Their eyes lit up with a mix of fascination and pride, proud to be part of the defense of our pond. That afternoon, I received a call from a neighbor, someone I considered a friend, who mentioned seeing Karen talking to other members of the HOA near the community center. She was clearly attempting to build a coalition to challenge my property rights, likely hoping to intimidate me into compliance or, at the very least, create enough noise to make my family uncomfortable. I felt a surge of irritation, but also a renewed sense of purpose. People like Karen thrive on chaos and attention. The more calm and prepared you remain, the less power they wield. I drafted a new letter to the HOA board, this time emphasizing the repeated trespasses and including a detailed account of Karen's behavior, complete with photographs of the pond, the boundary signs, and the evidence of her intrusion. I sent it with delivery confirmation and retained a copy for my files, knowing that if the situation escalated further, I would need every ounce of documentation to defend my family and our land. That evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset shimmer across the pond, my children's laughter echoing from the water, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. This conflict, while frustrating, had strengthened my awareness and determination. It had reminded me that property rights were not abstract concepts but living, breathing protections that required vigilance, clarity, and sometimes confrontation to uphold. I resolved that from this point forward, any attempt to interfere with our enjoyment of the pond would be met with immediate documentation, clear communication, and, if necessary, legal action. On Wednesday morning, the tension escalated further when Karen appeared once more, this time accompanied by another HOA member, a woman I vaguely recognized from meetings, the kind of person who nods along to every overbearing suggestion without questioning authority. They approached the edge of my property, their posture rigid and purposeful, and Karen began speaking before I could even acknowledge her presence. "I've been informed of continued violations," she announced, her voice carrying across the pond with self-importance. "Fishing without proper authorization cannot continue. We will be taking formal steps to ensure compliance." I stepped forward calmly, my voice firm yet controlled, every word chosen deliberately. "You are trespassing. This is private property. My children are fishing legally, under my supervision. Leave immediately." Karen's companion shifted uncomfortably, glancing at her with a subtle hint of doubt, but Karen pressed on, oblivious to the futility of her claims. "The community expects adherence to its regulations," she said, ignoring my warnings. I felt a surge of anger, but I kept my composure, knowing that any loss of temper would only play into her hands. "Let me be clear," I said, my tone resolute, "the pond, the land, and my children are under my protection. Any further intrusion will be considered trespass, and I will involve law enforcement immediately." At that moment, Karen's expression shifted from self-righteousness to incredulity, as if she had never encountered someone willing to defend their rights so openly. For a split second, I saw hesitation, the flicker of recognition that her authority was meaningless here. But her pride would not allow her to retreat gracefully. Instead, she muttered something about consulting the board and backed away, dragging her companion with her. Once they were out of sight, I walked over to my children, who were visibly shaken but safe. "It's all right," I said gently, kneeling to meet their eyes. "They don't get to boss you around here. This is our land. We are safe. Remember that." Their small hands clutched mine, and I felt a deep surge of protectiveness and pride. That night, I took further steps to reinforce our boundaries. I installed additional signage and motion-activated lighting around the perimeter, not to intimidate but to ensure that any intrusion would be immediately visible. I mapped every foot of the property, noting all points of access and vulnerability. Each precaution was a reassurance to myself and my children that the pond remained theirs, that their sanctuary was secure, and that no amount of bureaucratic meddling could change that. Over the next few days, I made it a point to patrol the area at different times, sometimes sitting quietly on the dock, sometimes walking the edges of the property, always observing, always alert. Tommy and Ellie adapted quickly, understanding that their enjoyment came with awareness and respect for boundaries. Our family bond deepened in those moments, the pond serving not just as a place for fishing, but as a classroom in resilience, strategy, and the quiet power of standing firm in the face of unwarranted intrusion. The following weekend, Karen escalated yet again, this time attempting to involve other neighbors, sending emails and leaving notes under doors about alleged violations. I read the messages with a mixture of irritation and bemusement, marveling at the lengths she would go to assert control where she had none. Each attempt only strengthened my resolve. I responded carefully, professionally, attaching documentation and reinforcing that my property was private, my children's activities lawful, and any future interference would be considered trespass. By Sunday, the pattern was clear. Karen thrived on escalation, but I had learned the rhythm of her behavior, the predictable swings between intimidation and retreat. And with each confrontation, I became more strategic, more vigilant, and more determined to protect my family and our pond. As the sun set over the water, casting long shadows that shimmered like molten gold, I realized that this battle was not just about property or fishing, it was about teaching my children the importance of boundaries, respect, and the quiet strength required to defend what is yours. Karen's persistence had inadvertently provided a lesson in courage, and as Tommy and Ellie reeled in their lines, celebrating small victories with wide smiles and triumphant shouts, I felt a sense of satisfaction deeper than any I had experienced before. The pond, our land, our laughter, and our memories remained untouched, a testament to the power of preparation, vigilance, and unwavering parental protection. And though Karen would undoubtedly continue her campaign, I knew we were ready, fortified not only with signs and cameras but with the certainty that our family's rights, and our joy, were unassailable. By the time the following week arrived, it was clear that Karen's relentless campaign had reached its inevitable conclusion, though I remained vigilant, knowing that people like her rarely retreat gracefully. Each morning, I checked the pond, ensuring that the boundaries were secure, the signs intact, and the cameras operational. The familiar rhythm of water lapping against the dock and birds calling across the trees had returned, but I was acutely aware of the delicate balance between peace and intrusion. That Monday, as I poured my coffee and watched Tommy and Ellie prepare their fishing rods, I noticed the unmistakable figure of Karen approaching once again. My first instinct was to brace for confrontation, but this time, something was different. She walked slowly, almost hesitantly, her clipboard dangling at her side. Her usual confident stride had lost some of its swagger, replaced by the awkward shuffle of someone who had realized that their authority was meaningless against well-documented rights and unshakable resolve. I stepped onto the porch, standing tall and calm, the embodiment of quiet strength, my voice carrying across the yard. "Karen," I said, measured and firm, "You are trespassing again. Please step back and respect our property." Her eyes widened, the brief flicker of defiance I had seen so many times before replaced by uncertainty. I just wanted to ensure compliance," she stammered, as if rehearsed speeches had failed her. I shook my head slightly, trying to maintain patience while suppressing the simmering irritation I felt at the audacity of her persistence. "You've been informed repeatedly. This is private property. My children are fishing legally. Any further intrusion will be treated as trespass." She looked down, her shoulders slumping, and for the first time, I noticed the absence of the self-righteous fire that had fueled her previous encounters. It was as if she had finally confronted the undeniable truth, that authority without jurisdiction was powerless, that loudness alone could not override legality or family bonds. Over the next hour, she lingered at the edge of the property, muttering under her breath and occasionally glancing at the pond, perhaps trying to find a reason to justify her presence, but I held my ground. I did not shout, I did not wave my arms, I simply remained calm, steadfast, and fully aware of my rights. My children fished happily, casting lines and reeling in small victories, their laughter ringing clear and triumphant, a stark contrast to Karen's muted, frustrated movements. By late morning, she finally turned and walked away, the weight of her failure visible in every step. It was subtle, quiet, and almost anticlimactic, but it was definitive. My children cheered softly, and I knelt to ruffle their hair, whispering, "See? Nothing can take away our pond, our space, or our fun. We've stood firm, and we won." That afternoon, I spent time reinforcing the dock, tightening every board, ensuring that the platform where my children fished remained sturdy and safe. I installed a few additional cameras in discreet locations, not out of paranoia but out of prudence, ensuring that any future attempts at intrusion would be immediately documented. I drafted a final letter to the HOA, summarizing all incidents, attaching evidence, and politely but firmly requesting that Karen cease all attempts to interfere with our property. I sent it via certified mail, keeping copies meticulously filed for posterity. Tommy and Ellie were involved throughout, proudly assisting in placing signage, checking camera angles, and even helping me hammer posts into the ground. These activities were more than chores, they were lessons in responsibility, resilience, and the importance of defending what is rightfully yours. Over the following days, a calm settled over the pond like a gentle fog. I could finally allow myself to enjoy the tranquility without scanning the tree line every few minutes. My children's laughter returned to its unguarded, carefree state, echoing across the water, blending seamlessly with the soft hum of nature. Karen's presence faded from immediate concern, her campaign thwarted not by anger or confrontation but by calm preparation, clear communication, and the unwavering defense of family and property. In the evenings, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of violet and gold, I sat on the porch, sipping coffee and watching my children cast their lines into the shimmering water. The pond reflected the twilight, still and serene, a mirror of the sense of victory and peace that now filled my heart. I realized that this battle had not just been about fishing, HOA rules, or trespassing, it had been a profound lesson in vigilance, resilience, and the quiet power of standing firm in the face of baseless authority. Karen had underestimated the bond between a father, his children, and the land they cherished together, and in doing so, she had inadvertently reinforced the values I held most dear: preparation, patience, and the protection of family above all else. Over the next few weeks, life returned to its natural rhythm. My children fished, we picnicked near the pond, and I spent time maintaining the property, each plank, each nail, and each sign a testament to our hard-won peace. The pond became more than a place to fish, it became a symbol of resilience, a living proof that knowledge, preparation, and steadfast defense could overcome intimidation, entitlement, and relentless intrusion. As the seasons shifted, we continued to enjoy our sanctuary, the memory of Karen's yelling fading like an echo, a distant reminder of the importance of protecting what is yours. And though I remained vigilant, I also allowed myself the simple joy of watching my children grow, of hearing their laughter across the water, and of knowing that no matter who tried to impose themselves, our rights, our land, and our family's peace were untouchable. The pond, my children, and the countless weekends spent together became a fortress of memories, joy, and resilience, untouched by the petty tyranny of an overzealous HOA member. Karen had lost, and more importantly, she had failed to erode the harmony of a family united by love, preparation, and the unassailable knowledge that this was ours, in every sense of the word. That night, as the first stars reflected in the still water, I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction, a certainty that the sanctuary we had built, through patience, strategy, and steadfast protection, would endure for years to come, a lasting testament to the strength of family, the importance of boundaries, and the triumph of rightful ownership over petty interference. And as I watched Tommy and Ellie pack up their fishing gear, heads full of excitement and smiles lingering on their faces, I knew that no amount of shouting, bureaucracy, or misplaced authority could ever take away what truly mattered, the freedom, joy, and peace we had fought to protect on our own private pond.